The war in Ukraine has exposed a critical weakness in Russia's military strategy, the growing issue of desertion. While the Russian military's sheer manpower advantage has long been touted as one of the country's key strengths, it's becoming increasingly clear that this advantage is not as reliable as it once seemed. Desertion, or soldiers abandoning their posts, is escalating at an alarming rate, with up to 70,000 Russian soldiers potentially going AWOL, absent without leave, in 2025 if current trends continue. The situation reveals more than just numbers. It's a reflection of the brutality, poor morale, and systemic failures within Russia's military. Reports from several sources, including the Ukrainian open-source intelligence project Frontelligence Insight and Russian media outlet AWOL Novosti, paint a grim picture of Russian military attrition. According to data shared by United 24 Media on September 29, 2024, the number of desertions has increased steadily since the beginning of the invasion, with the pace intensifying in early 2024. What began as a trickle of AWOL cases during 2022 turned into a steady flow of around 100 desertions per month by January 2024. This number had risen to approximately 500 monthly desertions by the end of Q1 2025. This five-fold increase in just over a year underscores the growing exhaustion and fear among Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. While desertion is not new to Russia's military, the magnitude of this issue has intensified in recent months. A breakdown of the data from AWOL Novosti shows that desertions from various Russian units, including the 2nd Motorized Rifle Division and the 30th Motorized Rifle Brigade, have reached troubling levels. In fact, in the first 3 months of 2025 alone, over 750 desertions were recorded in the 30th Motorized Rifle Brigade, a figure that could reach nearly 3,000 by year's end if the trend continues. The data is based on documents from the I Want to Live program, a Ukrainian initiative designed to help Russian soldiers surrender. The program has reportedly helped thousands of Russian soldiers contact Ukrainian forces, although many never make it out of the war zone alive. There is a growing desire among Russian troops to leave the battlefield, driven not only by the horrors of war, but also by poor conditions, mismanagement, and a lack of effective support. The I Want to Live program, launched in 2022, is particularly interesting as it directly targets Russian soldiers who are considering desertion. Through this program, Russian troops can contact handlers via phone, websites, or messenger apps to arrange their surrender. By January 2023, several thousand Russian soldiers had attempted to use this service, highlighting a significant desire to avoid continuing the war. This program has grown in prominence as desertions have spiked, providing a stark contrast to the official narrative promoted by the Russian government. Though not all soldiers who contact the program make it to Ukrainian custody, many are killed before they can escape. The growing number of surrenders reflects a wider dissatisfaction within Russia's ranks. Desertion is no longer just an occasional occurrence, but a systemic issue that Russia must contend with. The military's reliance on coercion and poor treatment of soldiers is helping drive this exodus. Interestingly, while desertion from military bases was once the norm, an increasing number of Russian soldiers are now abandoning their posts directly from the front lines, or failing to return from medical facilities. The proximity to Ukrainian troops and the chaos and confusion on the battlefield may explain why soldiers are now deserting closer to the action. One of the key revelations from the data is that contract soldiers make up a large portion of those who desert. At least 73.6% of deserters from the 30th Motorized Rifle Brigade were contract soldiers, with a further 22.1% being prisoners sent to the front lines as part of a controversial initiative by the Russian government. The Russian military's reliance on contract soldiers, who often undergo minimal training before being sent to the front lines, has proven to be a significant factor in the high desertion rates. Lower desertion share among prisoners is reported in some units. Reasons may include incentives, oversight, and survivorship bias due to the harsh realities of their circumstances, where desertion could lead to harsher prison sentences. Reports from BBC News Russian in September 2024 suggest that BBC Russian reported volunteers had more recorded casualties than convicts, while other reporting suggests many convicts die early. reducing observed desertions. Volunteer soldiers, many of whom come from civilian backgrounds, often receive minimal training, sometimes as little as 3 days. This lack of preparation makes them ill-equipped for the harsh realities of war, and may explain why many choose to desert once they are on the front lines. One of the central themes emerging from these desertion reports is the brutality of the Russian military system. Soldiers are sent into battle with little regard for their lives, used in high-risk assaults with limited support to test Ukrainian defenses or clear minefields. Reports indicate that soldiers are sent on dangerous, often suicidal missions with little support and even less regard for their well-being. The Russian military's reliance on wave-style assaults, where soldiers are used to expose enemy positions, only increases the likelihood of desertion. Russian soldiers are frequently asked to risk their lives for little more than the promise of survival, and many are left with little incentive to stay and fight. Besides the brutal nature of the front lines, Russian soldiers who abandon their posts are often punished severely. Reports from Medusa describe incidents where Russian deserters are subjected to inhumane conditions in detention centers. In April 2025, approximately 100 detained soldiers rioted at the Krasnodar Garrison Commandant's office. Most were recaptured, highlighting conditions driving AWOL, with soldiers often enduring beatings, poor food, and forced confinement. Some soldiers report being denied leave to attend to dying family members, a stark contrast to the more compassionate policies found in many Western militaries. The conditions in these detention centers are a microcosm of the broader issue within the Russian military. Soldiers are treated as expendable. This perception of soldiers as mere tools to be used up and discarded is a major factor contributing to the growing desertion rates. The Russian state's response to these desertions has been punitive and coercive. As desertions climb, Russia has introduced harsher penalties for soldiers who abandon their posts. In 2024, the maximum penalty for desertion was 15 years in prison. This is likely to increase, with reports in September 2024 suggesting the introduction of new laws that could add 5 years to this sentence. However, rather than addressing the root causes of desertion, such as poor morale, mistreatment, and ineffective leadership, Russia seems focused on increasing punishment. This approach may help to maintain a semblance of control, but it is unlikely to solve the fundamental issue of declining troop loyalty. Instead, it is likely to exacerbate the problem, leading to further unrest within the ranks. The Russian military has also taken extreme measures to prevent desertion. In some cases, commanders have created barrier troops behind soldiers to prevent them from retreating during attacks. In one incident, a Russian soldier, Alexander Gorin, described how his unit was held at gunpoint and forced into a suicide mission with no hope of retreat. Soldiers like Gorin often find themselves trapped, with no way out except death or desertion. Reports also say Russian commanders have resorted to more brutal methods to deal with deserters. Some soldiers have been found tied to trees and left to die as punishment for attempting to flee the battlefield. Others have been maimed to serve as bait for Ukrainian forces, a horrific practice designed to deter others from deserting. Additionally, there are reports of soldiers' bank cards being seized to prevent desertion. Without access to money, soldiers have fewer options for escaping or surviving if they go AWOL. This tactic, though simple, underscores the desperation of the Russian military as it tries to stem the tide of desertions. 70,000 would be approximately 14% of Russia's deployed force, magnifying the manpower problem by the end of 2025. Russia is facing an attrition and retention crisis that erodes Russia's manpower advantage. While the Russian military has long relied on its sheer numbers to overwhelm opponents, this strategy is beginning to backfire. The quality of the troops being sent to the front lines, many of whom are undertrained, ill-prepared, and demoralized, has diminished, and desertions are now threatening to reduce Russia's already strained military capabilities. The systemic issues within the Russian military, brutality, lack of support, and ineffective leadership are creating a vicious cycle of desertion that the state is ill-equipped to address. Harsher punishments may temporarily quell the tide of desertions, but they do little to address the underlying causes. As the war in Ukraine continues, Russia's ability to maintain its manpower advantage is increasingly uncertain. Desertions, combined with the high casualty rates among Russian troops, could ultimately undermine Putin's military strategy. The Russian government faces a tough decision. Continue to escalate the brutality and risk further desertions, or implement meaningful reforms to improve the conditions for its soldiers. The likelihood of success for either option is unclear, but one thing is certain: Russia's manpower advantage is eroding, and it is unclear whether the Kremlin can solve the crisis before it becomes insurmountable. The future of Russia's military strategy in Ukraine may depend not just on its ability to replace lost soldiers, but on whether it can win back the loyalty of the troops who remain. For more updates on military strategies and geopolitical analysis, subscribe.